Okay.
Okay. Well, welcome to this webinar with Geoff Williams. I'm very, very pleased to be doing this conversation with Geoff. I've known Geoff for a long time. And Geoff's a prolific inventor. He's made some amazing machines. His machines are used around the world. And actually, just before the call he was telling me about a client who's planted 2 billion plants with one of Geoff's machines, and is now looking for a replacement. He loves it so much. So Geoff, welcome to this webinar about the power of the idea and meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself to start, Geoff?
Okay, Bruce. Well, seeing the theme is on the power of an idea, I was running an agricultural contracting business, a couple of D7 dozers, wheel tractors running 24 hours, 7 days a week with drivers, and was farming and had a small engineering works. And we were so busy, and one day I was walking across this paddock and it suddenly struck me the power of an idea. And that transformed my view of what I should do. And to shorten the story, I sold out the contracting, moved to the regional area and started inventing, which I always loved to do. And I guess we, over a period of about 15 years, we just did nearly anything that people wanted to do, from all sorts of types of machines on a performance-driven basis. But the whole concept behind this was having less school, worked hard by hand, was to take the load off men's backs and put it on steel, to use ideas, the power of ideas to change the world. And thankfully, over the years, this has broadened out to where we've had a huge impact on rotary seeders and horticultural machinery, which, like in the last week, I've been getting calls from America and interstate in Australia and from South Africa, as you mentioned. So we now have over 1,500 clients in 16 countries, literally 24 hours, 7 days a week, producing billions of tons and billions of tons of vegetables, so as well as other plants and crops. We're also involved in tea, and so I'm very keen to encourage new engineers that are coming on the scene that it's all about being able to listen and understand, read the needs, and be inventive in a practical way that has an application to better the lot for mankind. So that's a very quick across my life story.
That's great, Geoff. So continuing on the theme of the power of the idea and how valuable that is, how do you identify where there is a need for innovation and invention?
Well, in all of the pursuits in human history, it's always evident that they need sufficient food or more food or better transport, or as the case is at the moment, how to journey to another planetary system. So the needs are always there. It's, I guess, being receptive to how to resolve these issues and communication. When people know you can build a better mousetrap, you better believe it. You'll have them coming to your door regularly. In this case, I have 4 24-inch screens talk to the world, and every week there's multiples of calls from everywhere with requests. And what I do is to use the power of that idea is to listen to the people. What are they doing now? What do they want to do? What's the change necessary to, say, double the production and halve their production costs and grow a business that benefits people in every level? And so that's where just every day the power of the idea, to be able to scope your mind, see and abstract the needs, and gradually materialize till you get to a point of a working, vivid 3D image of what will meet the needs, actually running in your mind. And then, of course, you can take it out onto SolidWorks and extrapolate that into drawings, build the machines, test them, and deliver. So, yes, all starts with an idea.
Starts with the idea, and that idea comes from listening. Is that
yes,
how you're putting it?
Yeah. Listening and observing, watching the news, I mean, might sound crazy, but after Idi Amin in Uganda, tragic. The tea industry was decimated. The labour had been either killed or wouldn't enter the country. And so as soon as the civil war was being settled, saw it as an opportunity, and we mechanised that country. And the result of that was that we had a really nice letter from Lars Vadeas, the head of World Bank for Southeast Asia, saying our company had actually kick-started the economy of Uganda. So that's a classic case where we read and heard about the need and then took some direct action, visits and trips to Papua New Guinea, and put feet on the dream.
Fantastic. So we're starting with listening and understanding, observing, and then so now you've identified the problem and you've talked about the problem, and I guess you've asked questions so you can really understand exactly what the problem is. Yeah. Then what's the process then you follow with coming up with the solutions, with inventing something practical that's going to work?
Well, I think you've been part of this, Bruce, but when we say have an R&D group meeting, and this can go for an individual point of view or a group, but if I'm leading the group, the first rule is that no matter what the idea is, how wild it is, off the wall it is, nobody's to can it. You do not want people trailing lead balloons in the early development process. So what we understand, we've seen there's a need. There's a critical need, and there's going to be a huge benefit. Then what we try to do is get on the table of what are all the different ways you can approach that problem. Now, remarkably, on a personal level, I find people talk about sleeping on it, but it is a reality. If you've viewed to the best of the ability all the requirements, all the need, all the scope, and then you allow yourself to relax and pop into your head any potential solution, no matter how wide or how different or how peculiar or extraordinary. And you'll find on that process of sleeping on it, you might be having a shower the next morning, but boom, it starts to become clear. And that's the idea. That's the power of the idea. That's the inventive spirit of man, if they're prepared to not just do the proven and tried, but to explore whatever. Now, when you've done that, you'll have a myriad of potential solutions. And so comes the next stage that I call it, I guess, roughly getting out the axe, but you essentially start to focus and analyze all the possibilities, and some will be maybe too costly, too difficult. And so you look for the simplest form with the best results, and invariably that will probably come back to 2 or 3 ways of doing it, and then it can be a debate or within your own reasoning and logic. But give it a bit of space and time, and it'll materialize crystal clear of what appears to be the one definite best way to approach this. So that's the next step in my mind.
So just thinking a little bit more about this. So you're kind of thinking about it, you're brainstorming, and then you're kind of sleeping on it is the process that you're using. How important is prior knowledge of the industry the problem's in, or let's say if it's horticulture or agriculture. So let's say someone's working in a sector where, say, they've got not too much experience. How important is experience in coming up with the ideas?
Look, Bruce, I think it's like, I think it's good to be obviously trained in engineering or machining and fitting, turning, welding, whatever those pursuits might be, whether there's a ticket involved or not. But what's absolutely essential is that you've had some experience, either by visitation, working in, or at least visiting, and being willing to get down into the hands-on experience of what the individual is experiencing. It's important to listen to the people who will paint the picture of what they want. But I think it was Steve Jobs said, sometimes you have to take those people to a place that they don't know they want to go. So if you've got new knowledge and you can see it can be applied to a literal problem, you may have to very clearly paint the picture so your potential client or the people that are participating can take ownership in what it is you're going to achieve.
Yeah. So if we're going to this, so firstly, you're listening, then you're making sure that you've kind of walked in their shoes and you really, really appreciate exactly the practicalities of the problem. Yeah. And you may have done
Yes.
that previously, so you know already, or it may be new to you, so you got to get out there. Probably a bit like you with the tea, you know, the first time you get out there and you learn about it, and and then you go and come up with as many ideas as you can, go through that process of just letting it rest, sleeping on it. Okay, you've got one idea, then you cull the ideas down and test it, and then now you've got something. Now it may not be the very best, but that's the best so far, and then there might be another iteration down the track. If you think of your experience with tea, which you've talked to me about, so if you reflect on your first machines with the machines you've got now, clearly there's been that sort of process as you go along, yeah, of gradually improving it, or then suddenly having, oh gosh, I was doing that completely the wrong way. Let's try something else completely different and solve this big problem, which I think was the way to the tea machines. Is that correct?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Example is we'd been travelling up and down to Papua New Guinea, which you're very familiar with, and more on a voluntary aid basis. And I was so impressed with what the people were doing up there, Alliance Training Association, etc. I enthusiastically explained to my secretary of the day, and her and her husband, who was a carpenter, went to Papua New Guinea. And while they were there, they went out onto a tea estate to work with this assisting Indigenous development to sell charcoal to the tea. And they met a manager, John McNichol, and was told that there was a frost in Brazil that had killed a lot of the coffee crop. And of course, coffee was skyrocketed in price, so they couldn't get tea pickers. They were all out just picking a few coffee beans. So she explained how we did R&D work. And long story short, I was getting a pilot's license, so I flew my Cessna up to Papua New Guinea, saw the team manager, and we took an order. And 6 months later, we'd listened, we'd developed, we'd looked at everything else that was around and got the best of the ideas and made what we saw as a state-of-the-art tea harvester and had it harvesting in Papua New Guinea in 6 months. Well, without going into all the detail, that sort of, we went along doing other things, and I think the Japanese would by then had introduced harvesters, and they had 20 harvesters running in Papua New Guinea. But I started to hear from the WA carpenters that they were trucking fuel, as you'd be aware, to 5,200 feet at Mount Hagen over, I think, 700 miles, something like that. And these machines was only producing 178 kgs of leaf to a litre of fuel. So now this is pretty clear. We've got a problem, very high fuel usage. They've got 20 of these machines and it needs solving. It's so evident. So having made that flight, I came back and I went on to build Silent Track, which was able to work on the Wagi swamps. And that was the forerunner of Caterpillar and John Deere in flexible tracks. And there's another story to that, but we can maybe deal with it later. But so we designed this machine and we took it up to Papua New Guinea, one singular machine, and demonstrated for one day. And the other part of a good idea is that you have to make it work. And it has to be not just the same or me too, it has to be extraordinary. You've got to do something that the other guy doesn't do. So you have to really study the fundamentals of what are we trying to do here, and then excel on doing all that better. That's where the power of an idea really generates value for everybody. So long story short, the machine I took up there harvested 15 tons of high quality leaf in one single day, and it did 157 kilograms of leaf to a litre of fuel. So what happened is they bought 5 of our machines and they literally stopped the 20 Japanese harvesters, literally parked them. So this was such an impressive accomplishment. It had taken out the harvesting of WA carpenters and other tea estates over about 3,000 acres in Papua New Guinea. And so mysteriously one day I get a call, and it's the United Nations, unsolicited, want me to register as an expert in agro-based industries because we've transformed the Papua New Guinean tea industry. So thinking it'd do some good, I did. I did 2 postings. Um, and during all this, I got to hear about the problems in Africa, and ended up in an office with the deputy managing director of Mitchell Cotts with my little, before computers, a little briefcase with a TV in it showing what we'd done in Papua New Guinea. So long story short, the engineer flew and joined us in Papua New Guinea. I did a survey in Uganda, and then we put $2 million worth of harvesters into Uganda the following year and totally mechanised it. And during that trip, this is the power of an idea working, I met with the Deputy Prime Minister of Uganda. I met with the Minister of Industry and toured the company, and they kept telling me, Geoff, we're broke. We can't do anything with the tea. And I'm saying, you're not broke. You've got all the tea processing machinery. You've got all these thousands of hectares of tea, and it's all grown into a jungle, but you can cut it down. And by the way, I've been to London and they want to buy your tea, and I've been to the World Bank and they're prepared to fund reconstruction, which was, I knew about. So we did it. And that was what I mentioned earlier about getting a letter thanking us for re-kickstarting the Ugandan economy. So the power of the idea to me is really vivid. It is very real, but you have to perform. You have to be extraordinary. You have to be dare to be different. You have to be a risk taker. You cannot be afraid of failure. Failure is, as somebody said, success is failure turned inside out. So in essence, failure is only learning what doesn't work and pointing the way to what will work. So broadly speaking, in over 40 years in this line of work with this particular company, I can't recall anything that's failed when everybody's wanted to continue to take it through to be success. But it starts with the power of the idea.
Great story there, Geoff, about that tea. And I understand now that there's even further evolution of those tea machines. Perhaps we won't discuss that, but you just keep working on the idea and then come up with a new way of doing it and so on. So and perhaps you'll come back with some of what you already said, but what do you think are the attitudes and skills and knowledge needed to be someone who's a good inventor, a good innovator, someone, who can harness the power of the idea? What's the attitude you need, firstly?
Well, I think you need to be a positive thinker. You've got to be a realist, but if you have negative people on the early stages, they can kill off any creativity and it'll just wash out. So I'd say one of the two major things you need, I think you need to be a positive thinker, and above all else, you need tenacity. You need to believe that if you pursue, you can have success. And that sort of grows with confidence as the years roll by and you see one after the industry after the other. And like, if I can just go on with the tea, it's a news story. When we first started, which I explained before, labour was relatively cheap and there was large, particularly women tea pluckers all around the world. But as time's gone by and people have mostly got, iPhones, and the kids see what's happening in the world and they don't want to work all day in the hot noonday sun for $1.56. They want to go get a job. So what's happened worldwide, a new trend, it's lack of labour, tea being left unplucked. And so what's happened is the world moved to harvesting with essentially hedge trimmers, like engine-driven reciprocating blades. Well, what happens with that, and this is where you have to, with the power of the idea, is make sure you understand what's going on. What's the key? What's the thing that's working? What's the thing that's not working? And what is the key that will make it succeed? So analysing what was going on is that we're cutting the next generation shoots. You're trying to harvest a two in a bud. If you walk through the supermarket aisles, you'll see really high quality tea. You see the 2 leaves in a bud on the outside of the packet. That's what people have been doing by hand for now 5,400 years. They're with their finger and their thumb, they're selecting the individual shoot. And if you go in with a hedge trimmer, you take all the next generation of shoots off, and instead of coming back in 7 or 8 days and having another bumper crop of succulent 2 in a bud, you have to wait 21 days for the buds to regenerate. So the yield's proven, recent studies in Sri Lanka and elsewhere, dropped by 30 to 50%. And if you like Sri Lanka with an export income, I think of 7 billion, 50% is a lot of money. So I could see there was certainly a need for a selective mechanical hand plucker. I started doing some work 14 years ago, and then it sort of languished for a lot of years. Then we had a resurgence on this with a team and another company I'm involved with, which is Williams Tea Proprietary Limited. And we scaled up the unit that I'd made as literally on a tea estate in my bungalow in Assam in India that actually worked. And we did a series of those that worked somewhat reasonable, but still were about 80 or 90 kgs for a machine. And I won't elaborate too much on all of that. But so in my head, the need was very clear. We need a mechanical selective hand plucker. And so I took on a deal with some share swaps and big risk that I would invent a new mechanical selective hand plucker. This is crystallizing what's needed. This is a clear idea of what's needed. The shareholders in Williams Tea Proprietary Limited agreed. And so ensued what was supposed to be 3 or 4 years. I think it's 4 or 5 years now. But I invented a mechanical selective hand plucker that does what the hand pluckers do, except it does it at 94,000 times an hour right across the tea bush. It's now worked for a year in America on the Great Mississippi Tea Company. And if you want to join a webinar, it's in October. They're having a special open day, very proud of their accomplishments and what our machine has done. And there's universities going to be there and people from all the smallholder tea sector across America. So it works. So now we're directly one-on-one with Sri Lanka, who acknowledge they have an industry-storing problem. They've quantified all these figures in numerous scientific papers. And I'm now developing a machine that weighs 8 kgs so that the individual can use it.
Yeah, fascinating story. If you look back at your first machines, just from my perspective, with my area being energy efficiency, it's fascinating to see you're probably getting, I don't know, per litre of fuel equivalent, you're probably at least, I don't know, what's the efficiency of the new machine per litre compared with your larger, track machines?
We haven't actually done that, Bruce, but to give you an idea, we was using 100 horsepower turbocharged Cummins diesel engines in about a 7-ton machine.
Yeah,
we're now harvesting about half that width, and we can harvest at the same speed with a GX35 Honda that's like 1.5 horsepower. And so that I don't know how many kilograms of leaf we get into a litre.
There's some fantastic savings there, which are great because, and perhaps eventually if batteries get even lighter, it could be battery powered and a solar powered, basically, solar energy charging your batteries at night. And then you've got a truly renewable tea harvesting machine. Yeah.
Well, look, in the case of Unilever, they had a very strong emphasis on, I think it's the Amazon Accord or something, but it's to do with clean and green. And there's a big company investing a lot of money, and tea has always been difficult, and nobody wants to see the driven, which I've had a great deal of emphasis for the women hand pluckers, but it nearly borders, you feel like it's, and not exactly, but it's close to like slave labor. And it's voluntary, it's not slave, but you get what I mean. So this is my challenge. I see the global needs. I see people divesting themselves of tea estates and building hospitals for the people and things, but I think this technology has the opportunity to absolutely transform the global tea industry.
So if we sort of take the lessons from there, we're looking at people who are young, they're coming in and they want to do something for the planet, they really want to make a difference. So I'm seeing a few things here. It's self-belief, belief that you can come up with that kind of confidence that you alluded to, that you can come up with a solution. It's persistence, being able to keep on persisting and going on and on. And I think there was one more you mentioned. What was the first one you mentioned?
Oh, I talked about the power of idea, but I can't
The idea. Okay. Anyway,
I think too, uh, if it's something that you like like if you're going to be just an engineer because you want to crunch numbers, you're going to be like buying a dictionary.
Yeah.
But if you have a hunger to want to use the engineering skills, use all the disciplines, be able to do the calculation, communicate with people through drawings, communicate with engineering and staff, and particularly understand the end user's requirements, then as somebody said, if you have a passion for what it is you're doing, you never work a day in your life. I joke with our people, and they don't always see the joke, but I say, we're paid to have fun.
Yeah, this was the other thing that came through, and you and I used to joke about this. You'd say, "There's a problem, and the response was, "That's a fantastic challenge." So it's that positive attitude. Remember?
I can tell you from my side from you. I used to get a phone call and it'd go something like this. I had some good news and some bad news. And I'd be going like, give me the bad news. And you'd string out what the bad news was. And then I'd say, well, what's the good news? And you'd go, isn't it a heck of a challenge?
Oh dear.
I think the classic, I was in Melville Island, north of Australia, and we'd lost a quote for $1.5 million or something on the benches for calm, and you rang me to say what should we do. We'd been notified they were going to award the tender, and we're unsuccessful. And we're like, well, we've got to build a better bench. We redesigned a far better bench at a lower cost, and the Minister of Industry for Western Australia actually terminated the tender and re-tendered, and we won it. And that was the only year I think we do on board that we made $1 million profit. So that just goes to show the true value of the power of an idea.
So now let's look at that. What are the blockages? What stops innovation and invention?
The worst thing ever is to have a director or one of the team who will listen. No, you go first, and the positive people will start imagineering, and then this individual say, "Oh, we're spread too thin. We can't do that. We should not do it." Bing! It's just like you suddenly snuffed out all the candles of ideas in the room. So negativity. You've got to have sensible people. You have to have financial elements, accountancy, and everything to do. But somewhere in the early stage, when you're taking the power of idea to be commercialized, it has to be cut free to be a free spirit. You have to be able to dream the ridiculous and the impossible, and then figure out how to do that.
Okay, so how can you get any suggestions on overcoming that? Because I'm sure many people are familiar with that problem, that you've got a great idea and then it just gets snuffed out, or go around, go over, go under.
I think what's important is to try and demonstrate in some measure how this might work. I'll give two examples. The idea of selectivity being very important that I talked about while I was in New Guinea. I would, after each day's work on the general scene of general harvesters, I would go through the tea estate and I would look at the hand-plucked leaf. And what happens when they're busy plucking, it tends to clump in a handful, and it ends up going through the transport system and being on the withering troughs. So you could quickly go around and analyse the different plucking styles and what was good. So, okay, now you've got an idea, you want to emulate that. So I went around the storeroom and the packing sheds and the R&D centre in Assam and gathered up an old handheld shears harvester and took the handles off it, and cut a long story short, bought an electric drill in town and motorbike battery, small one, put it on a belt, made a frame. And before I left there in my bungalow at night, I'd built a working selective tea harvester. Now, it was unpatented and it was dangerous in the sense of losing the technology. So the manager of that AVM tea estate that had 3,000 workers used to sneak out with me on dusk. He signed a confidentiality and we would test the thing. And then I'd make modifications literally in my bungalow at night. So it'll take an extra effort. But if you're a believer in your ideas, if you know you can change global industries, then that's nothing. So that languished for nearly 14 years before we put fresh legs on it now. But that was a proof of concept. So the next stage of having the idea is, in the simplest possible terms, how can you demonstrate that the idea works? A second example, I had a company called Williams Design and Construction or building Wildcat tractors, safe hydrostatic tractor, as a result of me seeing 3 people die in a small district of 30 people from tractor accidents. So I wanted to do something with a hydrostatic safe tractor. So we built, I think, 187 of them. But I had a group of directors on, and it ended up going to be a public company by a company in Sydney taking it over. So I became a minority shareholder. And it was like every idea had to be vetted by an engineering review with a professional engineer, and you'd end up spending more money on the review and analysis than you would have fixing the problem. But the problem was we had a remarkable good machine, but we'd used an 18 horsepower Wankel rotary engine, which seemed futuristic in 1976. But when it got out in the hill countries, the farmers didn't understand the airflow was, I think, to the cube or square, whatever it was, of the RPM. And they would lug it down, the airflow would be diminished, the engine would overheat and seize. So I could see that we'd built 20 of these things and the company's future was on the wall. But the other directors had hired engineers to evaluate this and didn't see it as a problem. So instead of arguing, I got one of these machines out of our manufacturer, put it in my garage where you stayed for a while in Warrigal North, got some of the guys to work on the weekend, drove to Ballarat in the happy days when Australia still made Wisconsin engines in Ballarat, bought an engine, bought it back, had it fitted by the Monday, rang up one of the directors and he drove it and just couldn't believe it. And the rest was history. We made 187. So you've got to be prepared to back your ideas.
Yeah,
create some evidence, create some reality. Don't just talk, don't just argue, do.
So that's also having those practical skills to be able to do it, or get hold of people to help you build it, if you don't have the practical skills yourself, I guess. Because
you don't have to do it all yourself. These days I do hop in occasionally, but mostly I've got a good team. So you also have to be a communicator. You have to be an encourager. You have to be an inspiration. You have to enthuse people sometimes through difficult stuff. Sometimes it's very discouraging. It's not all light and sweetness. There's some tough stuff. I used to say to the guys when we first got to Uganda, and I'd had to sit at the table and hand suture up a wound to stop getting AIDS from the local clinic, and got bitten by a bee when I went back. A hornet it was. This is going to be a great project. And it was.
so this is great stuff, Geoff. So let's now come to the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yes.
So I'm really interested in how you can see the power of the idea contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals, and those Sustainable Development goals that you in particular are particularly passionate or enthusiastic about contributing to.
Well, look, as you know, the power of the idea applied can change lives. It can change livelihoods. It can change food generation. So to use an example, I've spent a lot of time in third world. If you were sitting in one of the countries, could be Zimbabwe, could be Uganda, but if you were sitting there with somebody who was going to the corner store to buy a can of Spam now and then, was living off of the green cookable bananas because they were low cost, and you saw the TV and you bought an iPhone or could at least get to see one how the rest of the world lived, and you would be, if you stayed in that mindset, you'd be thinking, how can we get the World Bank? How can we get people that have got all this money to give us a better lifestyle? But if we passionately believe in the power of the idea, we would look, what is our resource? We might be sitting on an area that's got, say, an acre of land in the village that's arable, and maybe it's not too far from a stream that's over the hill. And maybe if we could just materialize that, we might be able to somehow work extra hours, earn enough money to get a bit of polythene pipe to run it around the hill to get water there, that we could start growing vegetables and sell them. And, you know, when I did one of the postings in Papua New Guinea, out of all of the 19 provinces that we were given carte blanche, aircraft, helicopters fly in and out, did a full review of hand tools right across, identified potential areas for industry. I came across one guy at Tari, where your mum and dad used to be, Philip Mungo, who had an amazing business raising chickens and vegetables. And we were able to help that guy with a group helping build a house. And I bought a brand new tractor out of off of Mahindra in India, and I ended up sending one up there for him. But there was a case where a guy could have sat down and said, well, I need help from the World Bank. So it's for the person to have the idea that there is the possibility, no matter how tough the circumstances, that they could have a vision of turning that around to be able to produce stuff. Now, if they identify it, if they start to try and do it, there will be people that will contribute and help without necessarily soliciting. So I think it's essential that we understand the needs, and we understand at a local level what could be done to inspire the people to be self-help with some additional help, you know.
So thank you very much, Geoff. Very, very interesting comment there. So, and one thing that sort of struck me now is, you know, how easy it is to learn now. Actually, you know, you can basically just get a phone. You've got an internet connection. You can research and learn almost anything. So it's almost come to the point where knowledge is accessible really easily. So if you've got a problem, you can say, hey, what has someone else done elsewhere? And, you know, maybe you don't quite know the right words to use to find out what you're looking for. But if you persist, often you get those ideas externally, and that can really spark you. Have you been seeing sort of much evidence of that, the effect the internet has had, and access to the internet in really remote regions has had on the power of the idea, and I guess people willing to sort of see what's possible and have a go themselves?
Well, look, enormous, Bruce. As you know, when I started business, there were no computers. We had to travel, a pocket full of quarters, use a phone. You had to travel, make meetings, fly overseas. There was just no connection except a teletype. And that was a punch tape. And if you were doing a long message, you'd be feeding the thing halfway through and the tape had ripped and you'd have to start over. Now, back in those days, I had a thirst and a hunger like you're talking about to understand what was on offer out there, particularly technically. So in those days, there used to be an odd engineering exhibition, which we'd go to and gather up every particular publication there was. There was no internet. And, you know, the next thing was the industry magazines. They'd have a reader service card, and on the back there might be 600 little squares and a number. So you'd see the advert on the latest whatever, and you would circle the number, and you'd wait for days, if not weeks, and the poor old postman would stagger in with all these brochures and pamphlets. And so we had a row of filing cabinets, A to Z, with our only technical specs. Now, I don't bother keeping any of that stuff because I just hit Google and instantly I'm all over the world. I want supply stuff, just did it last week, spent 14 hours. You might go after 100 different potential suppliers, say on machining. You might get a response for 12 or 15. One came in a few minutes ago while we're talking. Out of that, you might get down to talking 2 or 3, but I've done this in 24 hours. Not waiting for the postman for 3 weeks. not sending a written application and watching the post every day to see if somebody bother answering it. So I think one of the biggest things now with the availability of the internet, it's like crowdfunding and things. It should be encouraged for the individual on the front line that has the need to be vocal, communicate, have some ideas, try to make something start, tie in with others, uh, get actual involvement where the people are investing in that directly. There's too much on a huge scale, like, oh, we've got to wait for World Bank to fix the problem. Oh, we've got to wait for the wealthy nations to fix it. We've got to be down literally in the weeds, getting dirt under our fingernails with the people, with the need, understanding how we can change things and how they can change things. And then I think by networking that out, the power of the internet now is there to do extraordinary things.
Fantastic. Well, Geoff, I wonder if Julian's got any questions. Julian, thanks for attending. Yeah, I hope you've really enjoyed listening to Geoff as I have, been inspired. So, Julian, have you got any questions?
Hello, Geoff. Hello, Bruce. Yeah, thank you. That was very insightful. I didn't know so much went into picking tea.
Enjoy a cup of tea.
Absolutely. Well, that's all we do. We click on the kettle and or you get out your tea leaves and you take it for granted what's involved. And I mean, the efficiencies that you've even just touched on in terms of the scale and size of machinery to pick your tea from the big diesel unit down to the little Honda unit is incredible. That's massive.
Well, I always when I travelled around, I had a great deal of empathy for the thousands of women that were downcast, somber mood, not liking what they're doing, while we had this big machine that was $100,000 that did the work of 120 people. And I kept resolving to myself, one day we'd build an entry-level selective mechanical hand plucker that would empower those people, and that's where we are today.
It's fantastic. I mean, giving them that opportunity to have more ownership and yet introduce efficiencies rather than the big corporate company coming out from nowhere and almost dictating when and how they do stuff. That's a fantastic result.
And then the key is, of course, to make it viable and to keep the quality. If tea goes mechanized without selectively plucking, their market, the product, like years ago, you used to be able to have a few people go and harvest like I've described, non-selectively, because there was still a lot of high quality tea, and then you had the big international tea blenders. But now labour is so scarce, and tea estates, some have been abandoned, and now they're being sold in mass. You need a solution that empowers the very people at the front line, like the lady tea pluckers.
Yeah.
And that gives you a quality product that we can all continue to enjoy a cup of tea. If it loses its uniqueness and it becomes a pretty ordinary, like if you just cut everything off like they're doing with the hedge trimmers, you take maintenance foliage, and that just makes tea taste yuck. It's just dark green. You want that two in a bud. And so you have to be able to harvest that below the level of the maintenance foliage and below the level of the next generation shoots without damaging them. And that's what we've achieved at 94,000 times an hour.
That's incredible. That is yeah.
It's very simple. It's a very simple answer at the end of the day.
Oh, it is. Well, it sounds simple.
It's the arc of the engagement, and it actually pushes the guys over that you don't want. They flip up behind it, and it only harvests the two on the bud.
Yeah.
You look at it and you go, how to do that?
Yeah. And you touched on helping Uganda re-establish itself as a tea producer. I mean, is that still travelling well?
I'm not quite sure where Uganda's got to. We sort of went off into other areas, mostly in horticulture, which is, if you look at our website, you'll see what we've been doing. But I've been intensely back in tea, and we hived the company off and made it mainly a development company, and it's just getting legs now. Yeah. And I'm hoping to rapidly deploy this around the world. There's, as I said, there's a webinar or whatever, there's a demonstration day or two or three at the Great Mississippi Tea Company sometime in October with a client that's run the machine for a year. They love it so much. 2 people are doing the work of 32 people. they're winning awards in tea tasting as against hand-plucked leaf, and they've got universities attending and everything. We've waited to that year to prove up the reliability, prove we're getting results, and now we're talking direct with Sri Lanka, who's got deep problems, and we're developing even a lighter weight machine that's specific for the lady tea pluckers.
Fantastic. I mean, because that was going to lead on to the next question. I mean, the hunger of those tea plantation owners and managers to introduce efficiencies to keep their industry alive because of the ever increasing popularity of coffee. It's often been a challenge for the tea producers. But it sounds like you're keeping that going.
Well, look, I've been out of the direct line of selling direct to the people while we did this development phase, but I'm alarmed to hear that the likes of Unilever that have had a clean and green, which Bruce and I started to talk about, but I've got the components and I'm keen to do electric machine. The first one I did 14 years ago was electric. And of course, if it's not cloudy all the time, you've got a solar array and you're charging lithium batteries, it can be actually clean and green. But Unilever don't know. I was on a board in London with Unilever with other members, and we did mechanise 9 countries, and I did work with them in Tanzania. But I've been out of the loop, and I feel a bit remiss that we're nearly you're never too late. But I hear Unilever selling a large lot of their tea estates, and one of the other big companies that we were dealing with that has 62 estates have gone into receivership. So yeah, so this has the potential to save the industry. So when I talk about the power of an idea, I get excited when you've got something like this, what it can mean to the industry, what it can mean to the frontline tea ladies, and what it means to you and I about having a decent cup of tea.
Huge, absolutely huge. That's incredible and very inspiring that through a combination of knowledge, just worldly experience, and the tact of being able to talk to people at a level that they understand and can engage with. Incredible, really incredible.
Look, it is so easy. I have talked to a guy in South Africa a couple of days ago that rung in. I forget how many billion plants he said. It was somewhere between 2.5 or something billion. But he's come back with exactly what he wants. I then talked today to a big nursery that wants a continuous mixing line. The guy was so excited that I was actually listening. Yeah. I made 4 pages of notes and he's already responded with drawings. Selling's not something that's like selling a used car. It's just listening to what the real true needs are and coming up with inventive solutions.
Absolutely. That's well, I'm very, very flattered being able to hear you talk. So thank you, Geoff, and thank you, Bruce.
Thank you for joining in. It's appreciated.
Julian, have you got any burning problem you'd like to tap into Geoff's ideas for a couple of minutes? Burning problems. Well, yeah, I mean, a variety, but it's more electrical energy rather than potentially a mechanical, in the real nuts and bolts sense of an issue.
So what's the question relative to energy?
Okay, so we've started through work installing solar arrays across public hospitals, and
yes,
we're promised a lot of automated delivery of data on a regular and frequent basis, and we're not getting anything.
Right.
So we've given them a specification, and it seems to be it's quite an old school setup and basic programming methods that they need to adopt. And the newbie whiz kids coming through saying it's too old school. We don't deal with that anymore. Where everything comes up on your phone, but we can't access the data.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm not sure I'm totally clearly understanding the exact problem, but look, in dealing with anything where you have a technology, a method, or something you're trying to install that you passionately believe in, you need to scan around and try and find somewhere where you can make a huge example of it that's going to be beneficial to that group or those people. And if you can get them to take ownership, you need to find initially some people that have either got a very big need or they're very keen to do it. And then once you do that, you can sell off that and extrapolate up. Like we did with tea. There was other mechanical harvesters they didn't work. The people in Papua New Guinea bought one from Scotland or somewhere, and it was just too highly technical, and it just failed to do anything. So you've got to come up with a powerful, simple idea that gives particular benefit in the area that you're working above everything else that's being done.
Yeah.
And if you do that and demonstrate it, you've got to have a bit of shock and awe. And if you can achieve that, then people will acknowledge that. It'll get legs fast. In the tea world, when something gets going and it starts to be commercialized, they all know each other, and before you know it, you're getting calls from all over. So I'd encourage you to have a think about what it is you're trying to do. Make sure it is a radical benefit to whoever's going to use it, and then demonstrate it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. And not buy anything from Scotland related to tea.
Hey, my wife is Scottish.
Well, they're magical people, but it's not exactly sort of the.
She's half Scottish.
Oh.
I'm not anti-Scot. They built good whiskey.
Brilliant. That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually given me food for thought. So thank you.
Yep.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Julian, for the questions and the engagement. Thanks very much, Geoff. It's been a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Me too, Bruce. Thank you.
It's been really interesting because we've had these sorts of conversations at various times, but little bits of it, and sort of interesting to see it all coming together in one conversation. It's been very, very good. So
Yep.
Thanks again, Geoff. It's been really inspirational, I think. Thanks so much for your time. And maybe there'll be a chance for us to engage again in this sort of way.
Anytime, Bruce. A pleasure. Yep.
Terrific. Okay. Thanks, Geoff.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.